Lawrence William Lyons, in his book, magnificent book called The Language Crystal. Just going to read poignant information about the nature of our language, words, symbols, and grammar that affect our psychology, our biology, and our spirit. This brief excerpt is really about the difference between the technological language mindset versus the biological language mindset. And the point that he's trying to make, and the reason why I'm making this video, is that we've lost sight that all of our technology and the language that goes with it really sprang forth from inside the human mind and being. So all of our technological language owes itself to our biology. And we need to get back to understanding that the language of biology should dominate the language of technology, because that's the natural way of progression. Nature teaches us this. So, when technological language starts to dominate the mindset of man, man tends to fall astray and slowly destroy himself spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, and then physically. So this book is all designed to make you aware of the language that you use, the power of the word, and the origins of our language in the Western world, and how to reclaim the language of biospirit, biology, and biological language. Here we go. And this chapter's in reference to food mostly, and the nature of the way that we have developed our food in the technological state. Since pasteurized is not fresh, to prevent pasteurized, cooked milk and fruit juices from being called fresh in TV ads, a legal definition of terms can easily be legislated. A workable definition already exists. Consider fresh water, in quotes, as opposed to salt water. Also, fresh, in quotes, means not stored. Our grammar tells us clearly that there are no fresh roasted peanuts, only those that are freshly roasted. And even freshly is too confusing for labeling law. So what he's saying is that our language has been corrupted by the profit technological mindset, and it's constantly printing and telling us things that are absolutely false. And we need to understand the meaning of the words that we use and how they actually affect not only our food, but how those foods affect our consciousness. Technology and techno, as used herein, refer to the chain of processes that sprang from the use of fire. Agriculture probably began before the use of fire, and it can evolve without chemo sprays or petro-fertilizers. We can feed humanity naturally with powerful tractors to plow the fields, yet we need no technotoxins in our foods, for such toxins also disturb our brain waves. So what he's talking about here is, in this book, in the whole premises of this book, is that our language existed before the use of fire, but it wasn't written down. And so our symbols and our language and our words and our alphabet didn't come into existence until we harnessed fire and brought it into the village, the cave, the household, because it changed our lives so dramatically that we were able to not have to eat food on the spot as we found it growing in nature. We were able to cook it with fire, and that is actually the world's first preservative. We were able to store food for longer times, which changed our leisure lifetime, our leisure time. We were able to use more leisure time to think abstractly and become more symbolic and basically create words and the letters and the alphabet. But there was a price to pay. In preserving food by cooking it with fire, we started to fracture the enzymes that are in the food. And slowly, over thousands of years, we have been consuming fractured enzymes instead of live enzymes. And this, over time, has evolved the human body and the human DNA genome. And it's also affected our consciousness to a great deal, because our food is not living in the fullest capacity when we eat it or consume it. Moving on. I talk to trees, and I hear them answer. The word orator has common roots with the word horticulture, and humans also serve as messengers for the plants. A little segue here. I actually was talking to a tree the other day, and then when I read this page here, it just resonated with me in a big way. And if you think that's strange, well, I think you're strange, because I actually was communing with the tree in order to get a self-reflective answer to a question. And believe it or not, I got that question answered by being in the presence of a very magnificent tree. Okay, moving on. Just as bees gathering nectar pollinate plants, so humans eating fruit spread seeds around the globe. We keep trees alive just as trees keep us alive, and the tree of life must have a tree of knowledge. Good, in quotes, needs evil, to carry the plan of this planet unto other planets. So humanity, the only animal who can tend the tree of knowledge, is needed for this transportation work. He's talking about duality here, basically saying the tree of life needs the tree of knowledge. They are opposite ends of the same pole. So the same thing, but from a different perspective. And man has the tree of life built within him in his bodily temple. So he has to be able to tend to it. This greater plan makes clear all our phase 2 confusions. And when he says phase 2, he's talking about the civilization of man once we had fire and once we had written language. So that's phase 2. Phase 1 is man before he wielded fire. Ending phase 1, the garden itself told us to go forth, but there was no division of spirit, only a new plateau of life. And phase 2 humans used biology to feed the techno state. So our techno experiment began in order to save the tree of life from the final fire that will come with the dying of the sun. Money is such a confusing item because it was invented to regulate the techno state. Biology evolves quite well with no money at all. I'll repeat that statement. Biology evolves quite well with no money at all. Pretty obvious. The planet doesn't use money, just man. Biology evolves quite well with no money at all. But now, as we begin phase 3, many schemes will arise wherein money will be said to redeem biology. And phase 3 here, he's speaking of what might be called post-history, meaning our written languages may be evolving in such a way to where we still have a very sophisticated use of words and language, but we choose not to write it down or encase it in symbols or images. The techno state claims to naturalize, in quotes, people when new citizens are actually nationalized. A play on words here. Natural from nativity means to be in the cycles of birth. Innately, it's biological. We use money, unnatural, but a nationalizing power to trick the monkey inside of us. And now, beyond the money illusion, we can still use currency as a bookkeeping agent to keep current with our global eco-resolution. What he's getting at here is that our government and our educational institutions use words that trick our psyche, sort of double speak. The meaning of words like naturalization of a citizen is actually completely unnatural. It's devised of the techno mind state, trying to dominate our biology and control us, which is what we're trying to get away from, trying to make people more aware that the biology and the biospirit is what created technology, and the biospirit should have precedent over it in forms of our grammar and our language. Much technology in the final days was only for the purpose of making money. We had set our genetically engineered potatoes to have, in quotes, the protein value of meat, cashing in on the myth that we needed more protein. Much of our science was still ignoring the biology, and much techno research was directed at problems that could be resolved biologically. Glucose made in labs appears identical to glucose extracted from plants, but an equation that says lab glucose equals plant glucose is totally invalid. For the glucose in a living plant has an unfractured factor that is life itself, and to label such a substance natural is a fraud. Equations are always built on factors, and since life is a factor, legally, the label, in quotes, natural, must mean related to nativity, meaning innately biological. When you eat a piece of fruit, its sugars are already dancing with its enzymes, and so your living enzymes join in their dance of life. Remember, salt is mined and is not organic. Sugar grows and is organic, so salt cannot be labeled natural. Salt has no nativity. At first, this may sound like an overly strict rule of usage, but to develop labeling laws for foods, life, in quotes, must be our priority. A food is not fully organic unless grown with organic fertilizers and the products of life. Many states have rules to define organically grown food. Still, we need organized growers, a national campaign to educate, and equal air time on TV to get the word out to consumers. Tropicana, nothing added, nothing taken away, in quotes, said the TV set, but pasteurization adds enough heat to take away the function of its enzymes. So, the nature, in quotes, of proteins has been traded for added shelf life, in quotes. The implied warranty law says that a radio, if sold as a radio, must function as such, not just look like a radio. This law, already on the books, can also be applied to food. What he's saying here is that we need to be honest. We need to have laws that are actually totally honest. And if a food has fractured enzymes in it or is pasteurized, it cannot be labeled natural because it has no life, no nativity. Enzymes ripen fruit, but do not function if pasteurized. So, unless pasteurized juice is labeled, in quotes, toy food, as we must label a toy radio, it violates the implied warranty law. If a label says 5 grams of protein, a buyer should get a functional protein. The function of protein is living, natural, and organic. Terms such as natural, organic, fresh, and whole must be reserved for items that are just that. Fractured proteins must be so labeled, and each label should be seen as a legal contract. Grape nuts claim to be, quote, all natural, nothing added, though heat far over 130 degrees Fahrenheit cooked every flake, acting as a preservative. The flakes were pulverized, not whole. Jane Brody of the New York Times wrote in 1985 that more than half the foods we eat are processed and packaged. She also said that foods of the future would be packaged to preserve freshness, and that irradiation sterilizes food and extends its lifetime. Jane lacked food English in the use of the word freshness and lifetime. And here I'd like to point out the word preserved is actually pre-served. That's what the word actually means in its etymological root. So when you see the word preserved, some people think that's a good thing because it's still alive, but it's actually not. It was pre-served already by nature, and it's lost its life, and it's gained shelf life. The food industry was the largest industry in the USA with 18 million workers. in 1982, most of whom were sacrificing food to the techno state, and new items of aseptically packaged food sold 1.8 billion units the year that Ronald Reagan began his second term. Cooked foods were pre-served to the gods of fire, and humans ate the leftovers from altars. Stoves and ovens were to be sublimated ire. Foods were cooked, canned, then cooked again in the can. Federal law required this second cooking to stop the growth of botulism, which is destroyed by 5 minutes of cooking at a heat of 212 degrees Fahrenheit. Since enzymes die at only 130 degrees Fahrenheit, all canned proteins are fully denatured, totally dead. Canned proteins are not functional proteins at all. So, no canned foods are rightfully labeled. No preservatives, natural, whole, or organic, in quotes. But the drive to label foods improperly is a reminder of the great power of words. Our first currency in any market is language itself. The very first artificial preservative ever added to food was fire. So, hopefully that'll stir up some thoughts, give people more to think about, not only about the food that we consume and the way that affects our biology, the way that affects our psychology, the way that affects our spirit, because we are biospirit. And the language that we use is extremely important. It's the most powerful currency that we have. So it's time to take back that language and bring back the priority of the biology on the planet over the technology of the planet. There's nothing wrong with technology when it's used humanely, when it's used with conscience, when it's used with biology as the first priority. Thanks for listening. Please share.